May 13, 1940, 1600 hours, the Meuse glinting like hammered pewter below the chalk heights of Sedan, the air warm and windless under a hard blue sky. Calm lies to men who must cross rivers. Over the valley, Ju 87B Stukas from Sturskamp Jeschweider 2 and 77 tip their noses and fold into 70-degree dives from 10,000, 12,000 feet. Jericho sirens tearing the afternoon into ribbons. Terror descends in a mechanical scream. French bunkers of the secteur fortify de Montmey to grip the slopes in concrete fists. Casemates at Weidelin Court and Gaulier, embrasures black with expectation, while reserve battalions of the 55 Division, infantry huddle under camo nets and chalk dust. Confidence tastes like lime and grit. Bomb craters flower along the floodplain in quick, dirty blooms, and the air drills into the soil with a hot, metallic-smelled anti-aircraft tracers climb and fall like spent fireworks. Noise becomes pressure. Across the western edge of Sedan, assault boats shove off, rubber pontons and sternboat 39s loaded with grenadiers from 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions, oars lifting and biting, men crouched behind plywood gunshields. Nerves paddle faster than water. The Meuse runs slow and wide where Guderian's XEIX Panzer Corps has chosen to break it. Spans measured all morning by rangerfinders and rehearsed in whispers on the reverse slope. Practice meets the irrefutable width. On the French side, field telephones crackle with fragments. Barrage! Barrage! As forward observers try to stitch a picture out of smoke sheets and dust that clings to the tongue. Sight dissolves into sound. From the air, the Meuse looks like a road of steel from a boat. It looks like forever. Distance changes courage. But this time, the moral effect of the air attack was so great that there was no further effective resistance. Heinz Guderian would later write in Panzer Leader, his pen describing what his assault detachments felt through their boots. Bombers pry open doors that rifles cannot. A French 75 opens somewhere near the sugar factory and slaps the river with sharp, flat thunder, and for a moment the boat crews freeze, oars glassy with spray. Fear halts hands. Then the line of Stukas is overhead again, bomb doors yawning like mouths, and the defenders feel the ground rut and lurch, as if the valley itself is groaning under weight. Earth can be made to tremble. Beyond the choke of smoke, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division pushes toward Dinant, and Reinhardt's XLI Corps noses at Monthermé, while to the south the Maginot's concrete giants sit anchored and intact. The wall is strong where no one is knocking. On this river bend, the doctrine of a continent is being unstitched in minutes. Armoured spearheads have threaded the Ardennes. Hills, tight roads, and dark timber the French called unsuitable for massed tanks. And now they breathe on the Meuse, as if it were just another contour line. Assumptions are brittle. At 16:15, the first assault troops slide onto the eastern bank under the lee of the dike, throwing up dust with their elbows, wire cutters in fists, smoke grenades hissing white snakes along the grass. A foothold is a heartbeat. A few meters back, engineers unfold the skeleton of a light trestle while sappers, in the water, hammer poles into the silt, cursing through clenched teeth as splinters catch in palms. Bridges are built by lungs and will. Blood, toil, tears and sweat. Winston Churchill tells the House in London that same day, words travelling by wireless to a nation that does not yet know this valley's exact name. Elsewhere, a voice names the cost. A Panzer III grumbles forward on the west bank, its Maybach HL 120 TRM coughing smoke as drivers peer over the glacis toward a river they will not touch until the far side beckons them. Steel waits for timber. Luftwaffe radio nets hum with clipped reports. Treffer, Treffer, next target, while observers in Fieseler Storch pencil notes on maps that flap like laundry in the prop wash. Precision rides on paper. The French TUI army under General Charles Hunsiger, had drawn its strength south to meet an assault against the fortresses. What stands at Sedan is thin, wary, and blinded by dust. A plan stares the wrong way. Stukas pull up trailing black arcs of anti-aircraft smoke, and a draft follows them like an exhale across the river, clearing the view just enough for men on both banks to see each other again. Recognition hardens resolve. By 1700 a ramp of assault boats is ferrying platoons 2 at a time, and by 1800 the first prefabricated bridges jitter and creak under handcarts and MG-34s, every board a drum to the ears on the hill. Momentum has a sound. Motorcyclists from the Grossdeutschland regiment kick their stands and nod to the sappers, wheels already turned toward the road that climbs past the casemates to open country beyond. Speed is intent made visible. Sedan's church bells never ring. Clappers frozen either by order or by fear, and the evening light turns the dust to bronze as the shadows of trees reach out to the river like fingers. Daylight makes every mistake clear. Behind them, in the long arc of concrete from Montmaillé to the Swiss border, the true Maginot sits unbroken, cupolus cool. Searchlights asleep, embrasures untested. Strength stands where it is not required. In front of them, the path through the Ardennes has already done what artillery could not, and the river is no longer a boundary, but a seam being pulled open by hands that will not stop. The detour becomes the attack. In the silence between sorties, an oar knocks against a boat's gunwale and a man flinches, then laughs, then breathes, and strokes again for the far side under a sky that is suddenly big enough to hold a new kind of war. They are crossing a belief as much as a river, and as dusk slides into the folds of the valley, and the first tanks sniff their way over trembling planks, the truth stands plain in the smoke and the heat. The wall was never broken, the road simply went around it through the trees. France had poured concrete, steel, and doctrine into a wall. The Maginot Line, anchored from Montmaillé to the Swiss border, with outrages like Hackenberg and Schwanenberg, cinched by interlocking fields of fire. Strength was supposed to live in stone. Its logic was political as much as military: fortify the German frontier, force any attacker to detour through neutral Belgium, and meet them there with the best mobile forces under Plan Dial. The wall was bait as well as shield. Belgium's neutrality meant the northern sector could not be fortified to Maginot standards, and the Ardennes, steep ridges, tight valleys, thick forest, was assessed in French studies as difficult terrain, not suited to large mechanized formations. Nature was expected to finish the job. French High Command built around Maginot. Careful schedules, centralized artillery, and deliberate counterstrokes, while its armour, from Char B1 bis to Somme S-35, was parcelled out to infantry divisions and brigade groups. Power was split into pieces. Across the frontier, Germany first drafted a conventional Fall-Gelb thrust through Belgium until General Erich von Manstein's Sichelschnitt revision found an exploitable seam. Send the main weight south through the Ardennes under Army Group A, cross the Meuse, and cut behind the Allied left like a scythe. The plan moved the blade to the soft wood. Halder's war diary on 10th of May captured the opening note. Surprise appears to have been complete. Shock multiplies speed. Under Generaloberst Ewald von Kleist, the armoured mass formed a fist. 6ix Panzerkorps, Sir Heinz Guderian with 1st, 2nd, and 10th Panzer Divisions and Infantry, Regiment Grossdeutschland. Exlei Panzerkorps, Georg Hans Reinhardt with 6th and 8th Panzer, and to the north XV Corps, Eishoth, driving 5th and 7th Panzer toward Dinant. Steel had a direction. Their advantages were doctrinal and technical. Every panzer company carried radios, Fuggy 5, Stuka dive, bombers could smash point targets under forward air control, and bridging columns hauled prefabricated trestles to make rivers into midday problems, instead of season, long barriers. Communication turned speed into control. French advantages were in armour and artillery quality. The Char B-1 bis shrugged off 37 Mi hits. The Somme S-35 could duel PZ-30 and IV on even terms, and the 75s and 155s were accurate and plentiful when massed. Quality could not replace cohesion, but radios were scarce in French tank units. Often only in platoon leaders' vehicles, orders moved by runner and flag, where the Germans used ether and net discipline. Silence costs minutes. The dial plan pulled the Allied best. General Georges Blanchard's French First Army and the British Expeditionary Force under Lord Gort. Hard into Belgium, toward the Gembloux Gap and the Dial River, while General Henry Giraud's 7th Army sprinted toward Breda in the Netherlands. Forward was also away. That left General André Corrap's French 9th Army thinned from Dinant to Monthermé, and General Charles Hunsager's 2nd Army thin at Sedan. B-Series 5th divisions like the 55 Division infantry holding critical guns of the Meuse with insufficient anti-aircraft and little depth. The seam waited under dust. German panzer columns entered the Ardennes in strict march discipline, dispersing by day under tree canopies, closing up by night. Traffic control companies policing choke points with white batons and curses. Order made the forest passable. Bridges at Arlon, Bouillon, and Haiphalies groaned all night under the Maybachs, while Luftwaffe reconnaissance plotted French artillery batteries and river crossings with penciled grids on wrinkled maps. Preparation hummed in low voices. Guderian aimed at Sedan sector, because the ground behind it offered open country for breakout. Reinhardt and Hoth would smash at Monthermé and Dinant to widen the breach. The Meuse became a keyhole. French morale along the Meuse was uneven. Veterans manned the concrete, but many rifle companies had older reservists, limited training time, and commanders who had not rehearsed counterattacks under massed air assault. Experience lived in the wrong regiments. At the top, confidence masked fragility. On the 15th of May, when Prime Minister Paul Reynaud pressed General Maurice Gamelin, "Est la masse de man ouvri," the answer came cold and exact: "Hélène in a pass." A strategy admitted emptiness. On the German side, commanders anticipated the Maginot's strength and chose not to test it head-on. Even propaganda acknowledged that a frontal assault would be wasteful against the Avrages overlapping fields of fire and armoured cloches. Respect shaped the detour. The Luftwaffe's role was scripted. Sturzkamp Geschwader would pound crossing points in rolling waves, while He-111s and Do-17s spread the blast pattern to paralyse French guns during the critical hours of engineer work. Air power became anaesthesia. French air units, MS-46 and a growing cadre of D.520s, fought hard and brave, but dispersed deployments and command delays blunted their effect on the bridgeheads when minutes mattered most. Courage cannot be everywhere. Allied planners had expected the main battle in Belgium, built logistics for that axis, and invested faith in concrete to fix the rest. German planners built for a river crossing, stacked engineers, and married radios to initiative at every echelon. Each side prepared for a different war. The leading elements are already across. Guderian noted, with clipped pride, as his assault battalions established lodgements under smoke at Weidelincourt and Golier. Momentum fed itself. By the time reserves realised what the columns through the trees meant, the Stukas had already broken the rhythm of French artillery, and the pontonniers were hammering pins into the Meuse's silt. Recognition came a day late. To the south, the Maginot forts listened to echoes and watched the horizon stay empty, their searchlights and retractable turrets ready for an attack that prudence had written out of the enemy's plan. Power waited where no blow would land. To the north, the BEF and 1st army grappled with the German right wing on the dial, unaware that the knife's edge was already carving behind their left. Contact hid encirclement. Everything that mattered on the 13th to 15th May grew from these choices: a fortress line, designed to channel an enemy, a forest dismissed as a barrier, and an armoured doctrine that treated distance like a solvable equation. Belief, terrain, and method would decide who owned the river's far bank. The Maginot line was an organism of concrete and electricity. Gross outrages like Hackenberg and Schwanenburg sunk, deep with 3-metre, thick overheads, retractable 75 Munders turrets, 81 man mortars in counterscarp, and GFM cloches peering from armoured bells. Stone felt immortal. Beneath, 60 sarmers, gauge electric railways shuttled shells and rations through ventilated galleries, power plants throbbed behind blast doors, and telephone exchanges stitched every block to centralised fire control. It breathed through wires. Anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth, and interlocking fields of 47 Munarev and 75 Munarev guns made the frontage a geometry of denial where an attacker would be shredded by carefully numbered arcs. The math promised murder. But the line's genius assumed the enemy would come to it, and its strength lay where planners drew the fight, not where the fight could shift. Purpose became a blind spot. French armour was formidable in pieces. The Char B-1 Biz carried a hull-mounted 75 mm of howitzer and a turreted 47 mm SA-35, wrapped in up to 60 mm of armour. The Saumur S-35 married speed to a sharp 47 Moneras in a cast hull. Steel could stand and punch. Yet both laboured under one-man turrets, the commander loading, aiming, and fighting the radio, while company nets were sparse and platoon radios often the only voices in a formation. Brains were overworked. Artillery doctrine was superb on paper, with 75s and 155s able to mass fire through centralised observers and switchboards. But the reliance on fixed lines made the system brittle under bombing and cut cables. The guns needed silence to think. French field manuals planned counterstrokes by schedule, with reserves moving along prescribed axes to meet expected thrusts, where Belgian planes widened the front. Method preferred predictability. Germany built a different machine, mobile, radioed, and joint, whose parts meshed from riverbank to cloud base under mission, command, off-drag tactic, that prized intent over micromanaged orders. Flexibility was the lubricant. Panzers in 1940 were mixed by design, Panzer I with machine guns, Panzer II with a 20mm Panzerwehr mostly with 3.7 Kdub K36, and Panzer IV with a short 7.55 SEM K37 to blast infantry and guns. Diversity covered roles. Each tank commander wore a headset wired to a Fuji 5 set, a 10-watt transceiver in the 2733 Mats band that gave companies a common pulse and let battalion orders ride the air in seconds. Radios gave them speed. Guderian preferred to mass that speed at a shorepunct. Concentrating divisions for a break, in and a breakout, pushing reconnaissance and engineers ahead, and driving through rather than pausing to tidy flanks. Pressure made openings. Nichtklecken klotzen. He liked to say, "Don't dribble. Smash," an attitude that turned road miles into a weapon as surely as high explosive. Aggression became method. The Luftwaffe's dive bomber was engineered for this script. The Ju-187B carried dive brakes, a crutch for a 500 Tleya Juppers bomb on the centre line, and Jericho sirens that bit into nerves as it fell in a 60-80 degree arc. Precision wore terror's mask. Stukas were guided by forward air liaison officers at corps and division. Flivo teams tied into Very, Fliegerkorps, so that bridges, gun lines, and strongpoints could be hit to timetable, not merely to map square. Air and ground spoke in the same tense. Level bombers, He-1I-11s and O-17s, spread pattern blasts to blanket approach roads, while fighters kept the sky noisy enough to thin interception by MS.406 and scattered D.520s. Climber dulled reaction. German pioneers carried the Mius with tools that turned water into a phase line. Sternboot 39 assault craft, rubber boats, smoke pots, Bangalore torpedoes, and bridging sets graded by load class to bring footbridges first and tank bridges hours later. Engineering bent the river. At Sedan the sequence was doctrine made physical. The first waves paddled and motored across under Stuka. Aerial drumfire. Sappers lashed trestles. Then pontoneers built light bridges for infantry and medium spans to take PZSE2 and IIV once anchorage and current were tamed. Steps replaced miracles. Traffic discipline made the Ardennes, passable march columns timed by minute, dispersal under trees by day, fell gendarmerie at choke points, and fuel trains staged forward so that Maybach engines never ran dry on a hairpin in the dark. Order 8 distance. Reconnaissance did the quiet killing. Motorcyclists and armoured cars nosed out gun lines. Fieseler Storch spotters orbited with mapboards in their laps, and radio nets updated the picture faster than any runner could. Information outran fear. Where the Maginot's forts had centralized eyes and fixed arcs, the Panzer system had many small, moving eyes that could pivot the whole fist in a morning. Mobility replaced thickness. French strengths. Excellent guns. Hard tanks, stout concrete. Needed time to assemble and a pause in the storm. German strengths worked best at blur, where a minute could be spent once to save an hour later. Tempo chose the battlefield. When the Meuse narrowed the front, the German machine concentrated its inputs. Bombs to still the guns, boats to plant the infantry, bridges to summon the armour, radios to keep the rhythm. Synergy did the lifting. And while the big forts to the south were tuned for an artillery duel that never started, the real instrument of 1940 was this engine of coordination whose moving parts were men with headsets, sappers with poles, pilots with dive brakes, and staff officers who allowed initiative at the edge. The winning weapon was a system, not a wall. Evening shadows pool along the Meuse on the 13th. Mayer's engineers of Sykes Panzer Corps ferry the first assault waves to the west bank, beneath the chalk of the Marfay Heights. White smoke drifting like torn bandages across the water. The river stops pretending to be a wall. Stukas from STG-2 and STG-77 return in timed pulses. Sirens wailing as bombs stitch the French gun lines. Each dive a ruler straight incision followed by a hot concussion that punches lungs and loosens nerve. Air becomes artillery. In Panzer Leader, Heinz Guderian wrote of this hour with a surgeon's detachment. But this time the moral effect of the air attack was so great that there was no further effective resistance. Terror breaks calculation. On the west bank, grenadiers flatten against the dike and cut wire, while sappers hammer trestle poles into the silt. The clack of wooden mullets oddly domestic beneath the fading scream of Jericho trumpets. Routine hides fear. Farther north at Dinant, Rommel's 7. Panzer division probes for the locks and islands near Haux, sending riflemen across in rubber boats to seize a tow, hold where masonry and current conspire to help the bold. The map rewards nerve. French telephone exchanges in the sector spit static and fragments. Batteries blinded, observation posts buried. Counter, barrages late because lines are down and runners are missing. Silence chokes orders. At Gaulier and Wadelincourt, the first light bridges quiver into being. Narrow lattice spines pinned to a river that still pulls hard at paddles and ankles, and the blue-grey silhouettes of PZKPFI Flither and Ivy grumble forward to the water's edge. Steel waits on wood. Through the smoke, pinned companies of the 55 Division D infantry fire, bursts that disappear in dust clouds and echo, then flinch as fresh waves of Stukas rake the slopes behind them to sever the hands that might pull a trigger. Sight cannot keep up. Night crowds in around the lamps of the pontoneers, who work with blind fingers and curses to lash decking while Feldgendarmerie clear traffic jams among the willows with whistles and white batons. Order holds the crossing. At 0200, engineers report a footbridge ready to take platoons by twos, and by 0400 sections of a medium bridge grown into place under the last stars, its timber clacking like teeth as test loads clatter over. The river yields a path. Dawn finds French reserve battalions stumbling forward without a stitched plan, headlights doused, tankers uncertain of routes, artillery liaison missing, and every minute of delay handing the chalk heights to the men who paddled first. Time picks a side, on the Bulsen Plateau behind Sedan. A rumour outruns fact. Whispers of German armour loose in the rear, and batteries that should have crushed the bridgehead limber up, displace, and unspool the one defence the doctrine required at the critical hour. Panic moves faster than orders. Guderian drives his lead elements up from the crossings as soon as tread will hold, pushing reconnaissance and anti-tank guns onto the heights, while radio nets chatter short, clear bursts that bind the climb into one will. The fist closes. French 75s that do fire slam accurate. Flat cracks into the slopes and cut men from ropes and rails, but they are too few and too brief, their observation blinded by dust curtains shaken like rugs by the dive bombers. Skill cannot see. The 1st Panzer's edge onto the west bank, bridge around midday, oil, black and vibrating. Drivers gouging planks through slits as sappers signal with flags and impatience, and then the mass crosses, one company, then another. Momentum gets weight at Dinant 7. Panzer breaks out from the Haukslock Islands. Engineers throwing treadway behind the infantry as French counterattacks probe and recoil under precision Stuka. Strikes called in by forward air liaison. Coordination punishes valour. Back at Sedan, the counterstroke that doctrine promised never coheres. Reserve tanks arrive piecemeal, infantry attach late, and the Bulsen line, already thinned by nerves, cannot bar the road that runs west like a pulled thread. A seam becomes a gap. From London on the 15th May, Winston Churchill recalls the call from Paris in their finest Iowa. "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." Prime Minister Paul Reynaud says, voice stripped to its timbre. Churchill answers, incredulous, that surely the matter cannot be settled so soon. Recognition arrives like a blow. In the French sector logs, an entry records flatly what the smoke already wrote in the air. Enemy bridgeheads established. Situation confused. Artillery disorganized. Its understatement a paper wall against a mechanized tide. Language shrinks under pressure. German assault companies on the heights clear casemates with grenades and flame where they can approach, bypass where they cannot, and mark strongpoints for heavy guns, while the columns angle for the open roads toward Bulsen and beyond. The doctrine steps over stone. A French officer at the edge of the Marfay Ridge watches the columns thread out of the river fog and draws his pistol to rally a line that cannot hear him over engines and the whine of another dive. Courage drowns in noise. By late afternoon on the 14th of May, the breakout is no longer a question. Panzers are through the belt and fanning west under rolling air cover, while 9th Army reels to align a new line that exists only as pencil marks and best hopes. The breach becomes a road. Behind them, the fortresses of the true Maginot sit unchallenged, their cloches and retractable turrets immaculate, their interlocking arcs flawless against an absence. Strength watches the wrong horizon. Ahead of them, motorcycle columns and radio cars set the pace with raised dust and crisp bearings, and every kilometre gained now will take 4 to claw back. Speed converts to strategy. What broke at Sedan and Dinant was not concrete or armour plating, but the assumption that terrain and timetable would defend a nation. And the moment it failed was heard first as a siren, then as a rumour, then as a sentence no one wanted to say aloud.